My first meeting with Andrew Carnegie from the book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Chapter 1. For more than a quarter of a century, my major purpose has been that of isolating and organizing into a philosophy of achievement that causes of both failure and success, with the object of being helpful to others who have neither the inclination nor the opportunity to engage in his form or research. My labor began in 1908 as the result of an interview that I had with the late Andrew Carnegie. I frankly told Mr. Carnegie that I wished to enter law school and that I had conceived the idea of paying my way through school by interviewing successful men and women, finding out how they came by their success and writing stories of my discoveries for magazines. At the end of our visit, Mr. Carnegie asked whether or not I possessed enough courage to carry out a suggestion he wished to offer me. I replied that courage was about all I did and have and I, I replied that courage was about all I did have and that I was prepared to do my best to carry out any suggestion he cared to offer. Then he said, "Your idea of writing stories about men and women who are successful is commendable as far as it goes, and I have no intention of trying to discourage you from carrying out your purpose. But I must tell you that if you wish to be of enduring service not only to those who now living but to posterity as well, you can do so if you will take the time to organize all of the causes of failure as well as all of the causes of success. There are millions of people in the world who have not the slightest conception of the causes of success and failure. The schools and colleges teach practically everything except the principles of individual achievement. They require young men and women to spend from 4 to 8 years acquiring abstract knowledge, but do not teach them what to do with this knowledge after they get it. The world is in need of practical, understandable philosophy of achievement organized from the factual knowledge gained from the experience of men and women in the great university of life. In the entire field of philosophy, I find nothing which even remotely resembles the sort of philosophy which I have in mind. We have few philosophers who are capable of teaching men and women the art of living. It seems to me that there it seems to me that here is an opportunity which should challenge an ambitious young man of your type. But ambition alone is not enough for this task which I have suggested. The one who undertakes it must have courage and tenacity. The job will require at least 20 years of continuous effort, during which the one who undertakes it will have to earn his living from some other source, because this sort of research is never profitable at the outset, and generally those who have contributed to civilization through work of his nature have had to wait 100 years or so after their own funerals to receive recognition for their labor. So this is the note from Sharon Lechter. 20 years of labor with no pay and possibly no recognition. How would you respond to this offer? As he discusses below, Hill accepted Carnegie's challenge and, with a letter of introduction from Carnegie, set about interviewing the giants of the time, including Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, King Gillette, founder of Gillette Safety Razor Company, and many others. His effort ultimately culminated in the publication of several books, including the 8th volume of Law of Success and Think and Grow Rich, after more than 25 years of research. Think and Grow Rich is widely recognized as the seminal book in self development, introducing essentially all the principles that continue to serve as the foundation for the teachings of the personal development gurus of today. As reflected in Hill's own description, the process of developing and publishing Think and Grow Rich was itself a study in the principles he revealed. It may be telling that the manuscript of Outwitting the Devil was written the year after Think and Grow Rich was published, since the work may reveal the frustration and revelation of Hill's other self and how he conquered his frustrations and succeeded in using the very principles he described in Think and Grow Rich. Outwitting the Devil will reveal his spiritual awakening. I'm excited for this. And how each of us can learn from his encounter with the devil. Now, again, from Napoleon Hill's word. If you undertake this job, this is Carnegie. If you undertake this job, you should interview not only the few who have succeeded, but the many who have failed. You should carefully analyze many thousands of people who have been classed as failures. And I mean by the term failures, men and women who come to the closing chapter of life disappointed because they did not attain the goal which they had set their hearts upon achieving. As consistent as it may seem, you will learn more about how to succeed from the failures than you will from the so-called successes. They will teach you what not to do. Along toward the end of your labor, if you carry it through successfully, you will make a discovery which may be a great surprise to you. You will discover that the cause of success is not something separate and apart from the man, that it is a force so intangible in nature that the majority of men never recognize it. A force which might be properly called the other self. Noteworthy is the fact that this other self seldom exerts its influence or makes itself known excepting at times of unusual emergency, when men are forced, through adversity and temporary defeat, to change their habits and to think their way out of difficulty. My experience has taught me that a man is never quite so near success as when that which he calls failure has overtaken him. For it is on occasions of this sort that he is forced to think. I tell you, thinking is important. If he thinks accurately and with persistence, he discovers that so-called failure usually is nothing more than a signal to rearm himself with a new plan or purpose. Most real failures are due to limitations which men set up in their own minds. If they had the courage to go one step further, they would discover their error. Okay, let's read Sharon's comment. Sharon's lecture comment. She highlights the quote, "Most real failures are due to limitations which men set up in their own minds." I highlighted that same quote in my mind as well. A negative mindset and self-doubt can be the primary obstacle to success. With the current economic downturn, far too many people who have all their life done everything right are now, for the first time, facing severe economic adversity. The greatest barrier to their recovery is their own fear and self-doubt instilled by their recent experience. Have you allowed the current economic downturn to overtake you? Have self-doubt and self-sabotage held you back from reaching your dreams? Are you your own worst enemy? In Think and Grow Rich, Hill told the story of R.U. Darby, a gold prospector, frustrated when a rich vein of gold apparently ran out. Darby sold his gold claim for a pittance to the town junkman. The junkman brought in the right expert advisors and found that Darby would have rediscovered the vein had he removed his digging by a mere 3 feet. Had Darby persevered that had Darby persevered, he would have made his fortune. But he gave up and abandoned his dreams when he was only 3 feet from gold. Rather than being crushed by his error, Darby learned from his experience and went on to build an insurance empire. Will you abandon your quest just before reaching great success? When you're only 3 feet from gold? You can read how many of today's icons persevered through difficult situations in the book 3 Feet from Gold. Another book we will want to read. Alright, this is a new part in chapter 1. It's called Begin Life Anew. Mr. Carnegie's speech reshaped my entire life and planted in my mind a burning purpose, which has driven me ceaselessly, and this despite the fact that I had but a vague idea as to what he meant by the term other self. During my labor of research into the causes of failure and success, I have had the privilege of analyzing more than 25,000 men and women who were rated as failures and over 500 who were classed as successful. Many years ago, I caught my first glimpse of that other self. Mr. Carnegie had mentioned the discovery came, as he said it would, as the result of 2 major turning points of my life, which constituted emergencies that forced me to think my way out of difficulties such as had I never before experienced. I wish it were possible to describe this discovery without the use of the personal pronoun, but this is impossible because it came through personal experiences from which it cannot be separated. To give you the complete picture, I shall have to go back to the first of these 2 major turning points and bring you up to discovery step by step. The research necessary for the accumulation of the data from which the 17 principles of achievement and the 30 major causes of failure were organized required years of labor. I had reached the false conclusion that my task of organizing a complete philosophy of personal achievement had been completed. Far from having been completed, my work had merely begun. I had erected the skeleton of a philosophy by organizing the 17 principles of achievement and the 30 major causes of failure, but that skeleton had to be covered with flesh of application and experience. Moreover, it had to be given a soul through which it might inspire men and women to meet obstacles without going down under them. The soul which had yet to be added, as I discovered later, became available only after my other self made its appearance, through 2 major turning points of my life. Resolving to turn my attention and whatever talents I might possess into monetary returns through business and professional channels, I decided to go into the profession of advertising, and I became the advertising manager of the LaSalle Extension University of Chicago. Everything went along beautifully for 1 year, at the end of which I was seized by a violent dislike for my job and resigned. I then entered the chain store business with the former president of the LaSalle Extension University and became the president of the Betsy Ross Candy Company. Unfortunate, or what seemed to me at the time to be unfortunate, disagreements with the business associate disengaged me from that undertaking. The lure of advertising still was in my blood, and I tried again to give expression to it by organizing a school of advertising and salesmanship as part of Bryant and Stratton Business College. The enterprise was sailing smoothly and we were making money rapidly when the United States entered World War One. In response to an inner urge with no words can describe, I walked away from the school and entered the service of the United States government under President Woodrow Wilson's personal direction, leaving a perfectly sound business to disintegrate. On Armistice Day, 1918, I began the publication of the Golden Rule magazine. Despite the fact that I did not have a penny of capital, the magazine grew rapidly and soon gained a nationwide circulation of nearly 500,000, ending its first year's business with a profit of 3,156 US dollars. Seems like that was a lot of money back then. Alright, so now I'm going to read Sharon's commentary. For a proper perspective, 3,156 in 1918 would represent 45,000 today based on the Consumer Price Index average for each year compiled by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and 202,000 using the nominal GDP per capita tables. Wow, 200,002 US dollars. Not a bad profit for a first year in the magazine business. Then 18 to 90% of the new titles fail, and even the successful ones take 3 or 5 years to become profitable. Some years later, I learned from an experienced publisher that no man experienced in the publication and distribution of national magazines would think of starting such a magazine with less than $500,000 of capital. The Golden Rule magazine and I were destined to part company. The more we succeeded, the more discontented I became. Until finally, due to an accumulation of petty annoyances caused by business associates, I made them a present of the magazine and stepped out. Through that move, perhaps I tossed a small fortune over my shoulder. Sharon's comment. This was only the beginning of Hill's love for magazines. The Golden Rule was followed by his publication of the Napoleon Hill magazine. Later in life, he became the editor of Success, a magazine that is still published today. Wait. Hill. Let's go back to Hill. Next, I organized a training school for salesmen. My first assignment was to train a sales army of 3,000 people for a chain store company, for which I received $10 for each salesman who went through my classes. Within 6 months, my work had netted me a little over 30,000. Success, as far as money was concerned, was crowning my efforts with abundance. Again, I became fidgety inside. I was not happy. It became more obvious every day that no amount of money would ever make me happy. Without the slightest reasonable excuse for my actions, I stepped out and gave up a business from which I might easily have earned a healthy salary. My friends and business associates thought I was crazy, and they were not backward about saying so. Frankly, I was inclined to agree with them, but there seemed nothing I could do about it. I was seeking happiness, and I had not found it. At least that is the only explanation I could offer for my unusual actions. What man really knows himself? Let's go back to Sharon's comment. Again, so she highlights this quote that Napoleon Hill said. Again, I became fidgety inside. I was not happy. It became more obvious every day that no amount of money would ever make me happy. She highlights this same comment again, just like me. So cool. Anyways, I will read her comment. I could have written this about myself a few years ago, but when I took action by leaving a situation that, although financially rewarding, was no longer aligned with my personal mission, new doors of opportunity opened for me. It turned out to be the best decision of my professional life. Can you think of a time in your life when you made a difficult decision but knew it was the right one even when others questioned you? Yes, yes, yes. So let's go back to Napoleon Hill. That was during the late fall of 1923. I found myself stranded in Columbus, Ohio, without funds and worse still without a plan by which to work my way out of my difficulty. It was the first time in my life that I had actually been stranded because of lack of funds. Many times previously I had found money to be rather shy, but never before I had failed to get what I needed for my personal conveniences. The experience stunned me. I seemed totally at sea as to what I could or should do. I thought of a dozen plans which I might solve my sorry. I thought of a dozen plans by which I might solve my problem, but dismissed them all as being either impractical or impossible of achievement. I felt like one who was lost in a jungle without a compass. Every attempt I made to work my way out brought me back to the original starting point. For nearly 2 months, I suffered with the worst of all human ailments, indecision. I knew the 17 principles of personal achievements, but what I did not know was how to apply them. Without knowing it, I was facing one of those emergencies of life through which Mr. Carnegie had told me men sometimes discover their other selves. My distress was so great that it never occurred to me to sit down and analyze its cause and seek its cure. Alright, Sharon's comment. She highlighted the quote, the worst of all human ailments, indecision. She says, have you ever felt paralyzed by indecision? Yes. This was the first major turning point in Napoleon Hill's life. He is moving from job to job seeking contentment, and his own ideal professional life sounds like many people today. People who are seeking contentment in their jobs and lives. Hill's predicament was, by his own admission, self-inflicted. However, he found himself in very much the same circumstances as someone today who has been negatively affected by the present economic situation. Hill took advantage of his temporary defeat, using it as a spur to force himself into thought and analysis. To find his other self, Hill took advantage of his temporary defeat, using it as a spur to force himself into thought and analysis to find his other self. If you have been dealt a blow by economic circumstances, you too can use it as a lever and motivation to find your other self. Where is chapter 2? I feel like we've been reading for too long. Oh, alright. We still have a lot to go. This is going to be a 1 hour recording. So inside chapter 1, there is this part that is called Defeat is Converted into Victory. One afternoon, I reached a decision through which I found a way out of my difficulty. I had a feeling that I wanted to get out into the open spaces of the country where I could get a breath of fresh air and think. Thinking is important, you guys. As I say, I always say pause and think. Because when I was burnt out myself, I didn't think. I was living on autopilot. Let's continue reading. I began to walk and had gone 7 or 8 miles when I felt myself brought suddenly to a standstill. For several minutes I stood there as if I had been glued to my tracks. Everything around me went dark. I could hear the loud sound of some form of energy was vibrating at a very high rate. Then my nerves became quiet, my muscles relaxed, and a great calmness came over me. This is a confirmation. Because when I was writing a caption today for my TikTok video, I explained my, seeing the light in me in my own darkness, and I describe it as if I've surrendered. He is also sharing the same feeling, and then something called me in that darkness, and peace came to me, and that is when I saw light for the first time. All right, I'm going to continue reading, and you will see it's the same. The atmosphere began to clear, and as it did so, I received a command. This is God. From within, which came in the form of a thought, as near as I can describe it. You see, in my silence, that is the first time when I started to hear so that I could obey. The command was so clear and distinct that I could not misunderstand it. In substance, it said, "The time has come for you to complete the philosophy of achievement which you began at Carnegie's suggestion. Go back home at once and begin transferring the data you have gathered from your own mind to written manuscript." My other self had awakened. This sounds like purpose, like you receiving commands from God. Like, go back and write it down. Habakkuk 2:2. For a few minutes, I was frightened. The experience was unlike any I had ever undergone before. It's an experience. When you go through this awakening, it's an experience. I turned and walked rapidly until I reached home. As I approached the house, I saw my 3 little boys looking out the window of our house at our neighbor's children, who were dressing a Christmas tree in the house next door. Oh. When I recalled that it was Christmas Eve, moreover, I recalled with a feeling of deep distress such as I had never known before, that there would be no Christmas tree at our house. The look of disappointment on the faces of my children reminded me painfully of that fact. I went into the house, sat down at my typewriter, and began at once to reduce to writing the discoveries I had made concerning the cause of success and failure. As I placed the first sheet of paper in the typewriter, I was interrupted by the same strange feeling which had come over me out in the country a few hours before. And this thought flashed into my mind. Your mission in life is to complete the world's first philosophy of individual achievement. You have been trying in vain to escape your task, which effort having brought you failure. You are seeking happiness. Learn this lesson once and forever, that you will find happiness only by helping others to find it. You have been stubborn, student. You had to be cured of your stubbornness through disappointment. Within a few years from now, the whole world will start through an experience which will place millions of people in need of the philosophy which you will have been directed to complete. Your big opportunity to find happiness by rendering useful service will have come. Go to work and do not stop until you have completed and published the manuscripts which you have begun. This is like as if this message was for me too. I was conscious of having arrived at last at the end of life's rainbow, and I was happy. He has something to do, and it is aligned to him. Okay, so we come to a part where it's titled Doubt Makes Its Appearance. The spell, if the experience may be so called, passed away. It's when God becomes silent. I began to write. Shortly thereafter, my reason suggested to me that I was embarking upon a false mission. It feels crazy when you receive this kind of commands or ideas. You're going to think it's impossible or really difficult to do. The idea of a man who was down and almost out, presuming to write a philosophy of personal achievement seemed so ludicrous that I laughed hilariously, perhaps scornfully. And I squirmed in my chair, ran my fingers through my hair, and tried to create an alibi that would justify me in my own mind in taking the sheet of paper out of my typewriter before I had really begun to write. But the urge to continue was stronger than the desire to quit. I became reconciled to my task and went ahead. Sharon's comment. She highlights the quote, "The urge to continue was stronger than the desire to quit." There's this inner voice or inner compass telling you to do it. And if you don't do it, there is conviction. There is this feeling telling you you're doing something wrong. Remember the time when you wanted to quit but something drove you to keep going? It may have been your other self. I would call this other self God. But it's good. Looking back now, in the light of all that has happened, I can see that those minor experiences of adversity through which I had passed were among the most fortunate and profitable of all my experiences. They were blessings in disguise because they forced me to continue a work which finally brought me an opportunity to make myself more useful to the world than I might have been had I succeeded in any previous plan or purpose. For almost 3 months, I worked on those manuscripts, completing them during the early part of 1924. As soon as they had been completed, I felt myself again being lured to the desire to get back into the great American game of business. Succumbing to the lure, I purchased the Metropolitan Business College in Cleveland, Ohio, and began to lay plans for increasing its capacity. By the end of 1924, we had developed and expanded by adding new courses until we were doing a business nearly double the best reviews record the school had ever known. So they were really growing. Again, in the germ of discontentment. Alright, let's read again. Again, the germ of discontentment began to make itself felt in my blood. Again, I knew that I could not find happiness in that sort of endeavor. I turned the business over to my associates and went on the lecture platform, lecturing on the philosophy of achievement to the organization of which I had devoted so many of my previous years. One night I was booked to lecture in Canton, Ohio. Faith, or whatever it is that seems sometimes to shape the destiny of men, no matter how hard they may try to battle against it, again stepped into the picture and brought me face to face with a painful experience. In my Canton audience sat Don R. Mellett, publisher of the Canton Daily News. Mr. Mellett became so thoroughly interested in the philosophy of individual achievement on which I lectured that night that he invited me to come to see him the following day. The visit resulted in a partnership agreement which was to have taken place on the 1st of the following January, when Mr. Mellett planned to resign as publisher of the Daily News to take charge of the business and publishing of the philosophy on which I had been working. However, in July 1926, Mr. Mellett was murdered by Pat McDermott, an underworld character, and a Canton, Ohio policeman, both of whom were sentenced to life imprisonment. He was murdered because he was exposing his newspaper a hookup between the bootleggers. Sorry. Let's read that again. He was murdered because he was exposing in his newspaper a hookup between the bootleggers and certain members of the Canton police force. The crime was one of the most shocking that the Prohibition era produced. Wow. So this is what started the Prohibition era? Wow. Wow. So cool. I'm learning all the things that catched my attention in the past. So I read about the Prohibition era. I don't remember where, but it called my attention. And now it gave me more depth into it. All right, let's go back to Sharon's comment. She says, the July of 1926 murder of crusading journalist Donald Ring Mellett, the editor of the Canton, Ohio Daily News, was one of the most publicized crimes in 1920s. In 1925, Mellett had discovered widespread corruption within the Canton police force and embarked on an anti-vice, anti-corruption editorial campaign targeting, among others, the Canton police chief. Ooh, danger. Hill was reported to have asked Ohio's governor to initiate an investigation of the corruption, a detail not reflected in Hill's account. Wow. Local underworld figures and at least one Canton police officer hired Patrick McDermott, an ex-con from Pennsylvania, to silence Mellett. Mellett was gunned down outside his home. As the story goes, gunmen were also lying in wait for Hill, but a fortuitous automotive breakdown kept him out of their way. God's grace. On July 17th, the New York Times reported in an article titled "More Death Threats Follow the Slaying of Canton Editor" that the citizens of Canton are terror-stricken by threats of further killings by the rulers of the gamblers, bootleggers, and other criminals. As recounted by Hill, after hearing of Mellett's murder and receiving an anonymous warning to get out of town, he fled to West Virginia, in large part due to the work of a private detective hired by the Stark County prosecutor, McDermott. Two local gangsters and a former police detective were ultimately convicted of Mellett's murder. Wow. There is this part of chapter 1 that is called "Chance?" saves my life. It's miracle. All right, let's go. Chance saves my life. The morning after Mr. Mellett's death, I was called on the telephone and put on notice by some unknown person that I had 1 hour in which to get out of Canton, that I could go voluntarily within the hour, but if I waited longer, I probably would go in a pine box. So he would have been killed. Am I understanding this right? I'm going to read it again. The morning after Mr. Mallet's death, I was called on the telephone and put on notice by some unknown person that I had 1 hour in which to get out of Canton. That I could go voluntarily within the hour, but if I waited longer, I'd probably go in a pine box. Oh yeah, so he would have been killed if he didn't go. That's an angel sending him that message. Or someone being used by God to send him that alarm, that warning. This is good. This is juicy information. That's why I believe in God. Okay, my business association with Mr. Mallet had apparently been misunderstood. His murderers evidently believed I was directly connected with the expose he was making in his newspapers. I did not wait for the 1 hour time limit to expire, but I immediately got into my automobile and drove down to the home of relatives in the mountains of West Virginia, where I remained until the murderers had been placed in jail. That experience came well within the category described by Mr. Carnegie as an emergency that forces men to think. This is warfare in my eyes. But warfare, yeah, it's a battle. Like, you have a mission, knows like you need to write this manuscript, but somehow you get entangled in these situations where your life is threatened, when your truth, your voice is going to be silenced. Like, someone is working against you because they don't want you to speak, they don't want to use your words, they don't want you to write things down. Okay. For the first time in my life, I'm reading again, alright? For the first time in my life, I knew the pain of constant fear. My experience of a few years before in Columbus had filled my mind with doubt and temporary indecision. But this one had filled it with fear, which I seemed unable to remove. During the time I was in hiding, I seldom left the house at night, and when I did, I stepped out, kept my hand on an automatic pistol in my coat pocket with the safety catch unlatched for immediate action. That's fear, it tenses your body. You're in a fight or flight mode. If a strange automobile stopped in front of the house where I was hiding, I went into the basement and carefully scrutinized its occupant through the basement windows. After some months of this sort of experience, my nerves began to crack. My courage had completely left me. The ambition which had heartened me during the long years of labor in my search for the causes of failure and success also had departed. Slowly, step by step, I felt myself slipping into a state of lethargy from which I was afraid I should never be able to emerge. The feeling must have been closely akin to that experience by one who suddenly steps into quicksand and realizes that every effort to extricate himself carries him just so much deeper. Fear is a self-generating morass. I might You might Google what does it mean. Everyone who's listening to this video, if I ever publish it, please comment what morass mean. If the seed of insanity had been in my makeup, surely it would have germinated during those months of living death. Foolish indecision, irresolute dreams, doubt, and fear were my mind's concern day and night. The emergency I faced was disastrous in two ways. First, the very nature of it kept me in a constant state of indecision and fear. Secondly, the forced concealment kept me in idleness with its attendant heaviness of time, which I naturally devoted to worry. My reasoning faculty had almost been paralyzed. I realized that I had to work myself out of this state of mind. But how? The resourcefulness which had helped me to meet all previous emergencies seemed to have completely taken wing, leaving me helpless. Out of my difficulties, which were burdensome enough, up to this point grew another which seemed more painful than all others combined. It was the realization that I had spent the better portion of my past years in chasing a rainbow, searching hither and yon for the causes of success, and finding myself now more helpless than any of the 25,000 people whom I had judged as being failures. This thought was almost maddening. Moreover, it was extremely humiliating because I had been lecturing all over the country in schools and colleges and before business organizations, presuming to tell other people how to apply the 17 principles of success, while here I was unable to apply them myself. I was sure that I never could again face the world with a feeling of confidence. For me, in my eyes, after experiencing God, this is God humbling you down, you know, so that you know how to. This experience, I'm pretty sure I'm going to read it soon, but this also happened to me. God humbled me down by stripping all the material possessions that I had built all by myself, and to learn how to depend on Him and to the people that He puts in front of me for provision. So it's not pride anymore. Like you depend on God's provision and His ways. And a lot of the times it's scary, and it's just like He is saying, it is humiliating. It was for me when I lost everything. I thought everyone would be laughing at me. Oh, Joanne, the independent woman came crumbling down. But when I understood God's plan, it is Him humbling me down so that I am not taking action from a place of pride. Because pride is not from God. Every time I looked at myself in a mirror, I noticed an expression of self-contentment on my face. And not infrequently, I did say things to the man in the mirror which are not printable. I had begun to place myself in the category of charlatans who offer others a remedy for failure which they themselves cannot successfully apply. The criminals who had murdered Mr. Mellet had been tried and sent to the penitentiary for life. Therefore, it was perfectly safe, as far as they were concerned, for me to come out of hiding and again take up my work. I could not come out, however, because now I faced circumstances more frightful than the criminals who had sent me into hiding. The experience had destroyed whatever initiative I had possessed. I felt myself in the clutches of some depressing influence which seemed like a nightmare. I was alive, I could move around, but I could not think of a single move by which I might continue to seek the goal which I had, at Mr. Carnegie's suggestion, set for myself. I was rapidly becoming indifferent not only toward myself, but worse still, I was becoming grouchy and irritable towards those who had given me shelter during my emergency. I faced the greatest emergency of my life. Unless you have gone through a similar experience, you cannot possibly know how I felt. Such experiences cannot be described. To be understood, they must be felt. This is so true. For me, this situation was when I was burnt out. I was fearful of changing my life. I was feeling not enough, feeling small to open those opportunities that I had in front of me. But I was already broken. My body was injured. I couldn't get out of my bed. There was so many things that was wrong in my life. But still I found myself paralyzed. Alright, let's go to Sharon's comment. She highlighted this quote: my reasoning faculty had almost been paralyzed. You see, she highlights the same things like me. It's the first time I'm reading this book. This is so cool. Hill was paralyzed first by fear or physical harm, and then by the shame of having been paralyzed by that fear. Have you ever been paralyzed by similar emotions? When you're faced with your own emergency, fear can either motivate you or paralyze you. By recognizing that you have a choice and reacting positively to your fears, you can permanently change your life for the better. Many people today may experience the same feelings of anger followed by irritability and the debilitating feeling of indifference. They feel discouraged and lack self-confidence due to uncertainty in their financial situation or personal lives. They may be angry and allow that anger to paralyze them. I had a conversation with just such a young man. I am 30 years old, he said, and have no marketable skills or prospects. He had a millions of excuses for not taking action to change his situation. And I pointed out that unless you took action, nothing would change, unless you make an effort to change things. I said, in a year's time, the only difference will be that you are 31 years old with no marketable skills or prospects. Does this pattern sound familiar to you? Either for yourself or someone you care for? How do you break that paralysis? Napoleon Hill now shares how he overcame his fear and indifference and found the hope, inspiration, and motivation to recover and create success in his life. And Napoleon Hill titled this part of chapter 1, The Most Dramatic Moment of My Life. It is indeed dramatic as well in my life when it happened. Alright, the most dramatic moment of my life. The turn came suddenly in fall of 1927, more than a year after the Canton incident. I left the house one night and walked up to the public school building on top of a hill above the town. I had reached a decision to fight the matter out with myself before that night ended. I began to walk around the building, trying to force my befuddled brain to think clearly. I must have made several hundred trips around the building before anything which even remotely resembled organized thought began to take place in my mind. As I walked, repeated over and over to myself, there is a way out, and I'm going to find it before I go back to the house. I must have repeated that same sentence 1,000 times. Moreover, I meant exactly what I was saying. So he's using his words. Remember to use your words, and he is using it. He repeated it several thousand times. Well, that's maybe an exaggeration, but let's continue reading. I was thoroughly disgusted with myself, but I entertained a hope of salvation. Then, like a flash of lightning, out of a clear sky, an idea burst into my mind with such force that the impulse drove my blood up and down my veins. This is your testing time. You have been reduced to poverty and humiliated in order that you might be forced to discover your other self. For this time in years, I recalled what Mr. Carnegie had said about this other self. I recalled now that he said I would discover it toward the end of my labor of research into the causes of failure and success. and that the discovery usually came as a result of an emergency when men are forced to change their habits and to think their way out of difficulty. I continued to walk around the schoolhouse, but now I was walking on air. Subconsciously, I seemed to know that I was about to be released from this safe, self made prison into which I had cast myself. I realized that this great emergency had brought me an opportunity not merely to discover my other self, but to test the soundness of the philosophy of achievement, which I had been teaching others as being workable. Soon I would know whether it would work or not. I made up my mind that if it did not work, I would burn the manuscripts I had written and never again be guilty of telling other people that they were the masters of their fate, the captains of their soul. Let's read Sharon's comment. She says, if today's economy, if today's economic times have dealt you a blow, moving you toward poverty, embarrassing you, or damaging your self confidence, consider it a test. Just as Napoleon Hill did in the late 1920s and early 1930s, force yourself to discover your other self. By working through the low points in your life and persevering, you can gain the insight needed to succeed. That's the value in being in your dark. Being in the dark. But you will want to be able to be proactive on it. Okay, you can embrace the dark and stay there. But you will want to get out of there and you will want to think. So I'm going to read Sharon's comment. Hill is paraphrasing the poem Invictus, published in 1888 by William Ernest Henley, 1849 to 1903. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from the pole. Alright, I will read it again. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I think whatever gods may be. For my unconquerable soul, he mentions God. Alright, in the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud under the bludgeonings of chance. My head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my faith, I am the captain of my soul. The moon was just rising over the mountaintop. I had never seen it shine so brightly before. So this is already Napoleon here writing, okay? This is Napoleon here. The full moon was just rising over the mountaintop. I had never seen it shine so brightly before. As I stood gazing at it, another thought flashed into my mind. It was this. You have been telling other people how to master fear and how to surmount difficulties which arise out of the emergencies of life. From now on, you can speak with authority. Speak with authority. This sounds God. Because you are about to rise above your own difficulties, I rise above all attacks. With courage and purpose, resolute and unafraid. I rise above all attacks. I have authority over all forms of darkness. Sounds God? Yes, it's God. Right. With that thought came a chance in the chemistry of my being which lifted me into a state of exultation I had never before known. My brain began to clear itself of the state of lethargy into which it had lapsed. My faculty of reason began to work once more. You see, there is this sudden inspiration When God downloads something in your mind, it comes like this. I say those are visions or downloads from God, like a flashback of something that you've never had before. Right? God can bring you flashbacks from the past, flashbacks from His resources that only He can give you, and He can give you flashbacks from the future, and give you flashbacks from the present to help you see what you have. God is that powerful. All right, let's continue reading. For a brief moment, I was happy to have had the privilege of going through those long months of torment, because the experience provided an opportunity for me to test the soundness of the principles of achievement which I had so laboriously wrested from my research. When this thought came to me, I stopped still, drew my feet closely together, saluted. I did not know what or whom. He is acknowledging a presence. Alright, and stood rigidly at attention for several minutes. This seemed at first like a foolish thing to do, but while I was standing there, another thought came through in the form of an order. That was a brief and snappy as any ever given by a military commander to a subordinate. Listen so that you can obey. Those words repeated in my life last year. Alright. The order said, tomorrow get into your automobile and drive to Philadelphia, where you will receive aid in publishing your philosophy of achievement. There was no further explanation, no modification of the order. As soon as I received it, I walked back to the house, went to bed, and slept with peace of mind, such as I had known for over a year. It gives you peace. When I awoke the following morning, I got out of bed and immediately began to pack my clothes and make ready for the trip to Philadelphia. My reason told me that I was embarking upon a false mission. Is your mind telling you, stop? And your mind can't believe of something that it cannot see, your eyes cannot see. Your mind project management system is based on what you can see, feel, touch, everything from your five senses. So whenever you're about to do something that is from faith, it hesitates. As soon as I received it, I walked back to the house. Alright, I read this before. So when I awoke the following morning, I got out of bed, immediately began to pack my clothes and make ready for the trip to Philadelphia. My reason told me that I was embarking upon a false mission. Who did I know in Philadelphia to whom I might apply for financial aid in publishing 8 volumes of books at cost of $25,000? I asked myself. Instantly, the answer to that question flashed into my mind, as plainly as if it had been uttered in audible words. You're following orders now instead of asking questions. Your other self will be in charge during this trip. Your invisible part of you. There was another condition which seemed to make my preparation to go to Philadelphia absurd. I had no money. This is taking action with faith. You don't know what's there. You don't even have money to go there. This is so cool. This thought had barely occurred to me when my other self exploded it by giving another sharp order. Ask your brother-in-law for $50 and he will lend it to you. The order seemed definite and final. Without further hesitation, I followed instructions. Wow, I wish. Keep reading. The order seemed definite and final. Without further hesitation, I followed instructions. When I asked my brother-in-law for the money, he said, "Why certainly? Why certainly you can have $50, but if you're going to be gone for very long, you had better take $100." Guys, I'm in a library and people may think that I'm actually getting excited reading a book, but I'm so happy reading this book right now. It multiplied. It's so cool. I thanked him and said, "I thought $50 would be enough." I knew it was not enough, but that was the amount my other self had commanded me to ask for. And that is the amount I secured. I was greatly relieved when I found that my brother-in-law was not going to ask me why I was going to Philadelphia. If he had known all that had taken place in my mind during the previous night, he perhaps would have thought I should go to a psychiatric hospital for treatment instead of going to Philadelphia on a wild goose chase. And thank God for this book. Thank God for this book. At the end of chapter 1, I will tell you how come I started reading this book. Alright, there's this part in chapter 1 called "My Other Self Takes Command." I left with my head telling me that I was a fool, and my other self commanding me to ignore the challenge and carry out my instructions. I drove all night, arriving in Philadelphia the next morning. My first thought was to look up a modestly priced boarding house where I could rent a room for about $1 a day. Here again, my other self took charge and gave command to register at the most exclusive hotel in the city. God is good all the time. If he ain't, then you're lying. This is so good. Alright, with a little more than $40 of my remaining capital in my pocket, it seemed like a financial suicide. When I marched up to the desk and asked for a room, or rather, I should say I started to ask a room I started to ask for a room when my newly discovered other self gave the order to ask for a suite of rooms, the cost of which would about consume my remaining capital in 2 days. I obeyed. The bellboy picked up my bags, handed me my claim check for my automobile, and bowed me toward the elevator as if I were the Prince of Wales. It was the first time in more than a year that any human being had shown me such deference. Deference? Deference. My own relatives, with whom I had been living far from having shown me deference, had, so I imagined, felt I was a burden on their hands. Oh, and that I had been in for the past year could be anything other than a burden to all with whom he came in contact with. It was becoming apparent that my other self was determined to wean me away from the inferiority complex which I had developed. I tossed the bellboy $1. I started to estimate what my hotel bill would be by the end of the week when my other self commanded me to get my mind entirely off of all thoughts of limitation and to conduct myself for the time being just as I would if I had all the money I wanted in my pockets. Go for it. Daddy is going to take care of the bill. Daddy in heaven. This is provision from God. This is so good. The experience I was passing through was both new and strange to me. I had never posed as being anything other than what I believe myself to be. For nearly half an hour, this other self gave orders which I followed to the letter during the subsequent period of my stay in Philadelphia. The instructions were given through the medium of thoughts which presented themselves in my mind, which with such force that they were readily distinguishable from my ordinary self-created thoughts. Sharon's comment. Hill took on the persona of the wealthy man he wanted to be. We strongly agree that to be wealthy, you need to think wealthy. It is also important to be in right environment. Don Green, CEO of the Napoleon Hill Foundation, once told me, I first bought my good suits from Sobel, a custom clothing store where Eastman Kodak executives shopped. The owner had a sign behind the register that said, "If you want to be a success, you must first dress the part." However, we recommend moderation in trying to emulate Mr. Hill in spending money that he did not have. If you listen to that other self, go for it. Right? If you are taking action from your own, one self, your world self, don't do it. You need to do it with that other self. Yeah, that other self. Together, not all by yourself. This is gold. All right, we're reaching chapter 2. So, I received strange orders from a strange source. Right? This is that part. So Napoleon Hill says, "My instructions began in this fashion. You're now completely in charge of your other self. You are entitled to know that two entities occupy your body. As in fact, two similar entities occupy the body of each living person on earth. One of these entities is motivated by and responds to the impulse of fear. The other is motivated by and responds to the impulse of faith. For more than a year, you have been driven like a slave by the fear entity. Night before last, the fate entity gained control over your physical body, and you are now motivated by that entity. For the sake of convenience, you may call this faith entity your other self. For the sake of convenience, God has plans for this. It knows no limitation, has no fears, and recognizes no such words as impossible. You were directed to select this environment of luxury in a good hotel as a means of discouraging the return to power of the fear entity. That fear-motivated old self is not dead. It has merely been dethroned, and it will follow you around wherever you go, awaiting a favorable opportunity to step in and take charge of you again. It can gain control of you only through your thoughts. As I was telling before in my life, whatever thoughts you feed your faith with, your faith can lean on the positive side or on the negative side. Alright, so feed your faith with the good ones, with the good food, with the good nurturing. Remember this, and keep the doors to your mind tightly closed against all thoughts which seek to limit you in any matter whatsoever, and you will be safe. This is so cool. I just explained today in my life that you should ask for prayers or learn how to protect your ears, protect your eyes, so that these things cannot enter your mind. I think Napoleon Hill is going to be another best friend in heaven. We're going to connect really well. I like this man. Alright, let's continue. It's been already 1 hour and 14 minutes. Bear with me, you guys. We're reaching chapter 2. Do not permit yourself to worry about the money you will need for your immediate expenses. That will come to you by time you must have it. Now let us get down to business. First of all, you should know that the faith entity now is in charge of your body performs no miracle, nor does it work in opposition to any of nature's law. As long as it is in charge of your body, it will guide you when you call on it through impulses of thoughts which it will place in your mind in carrying out your plans through the most logical and convenient natural media available. Above everything else, get this fact clearly fixed in your mind that your other self will not do your work for you. So true. It will only guide you intelligently in achieving for yourself the objects of your desires. So Sharon's comment is it's a question. Will you be guided by faith, or will you allow fear to overtake you? These people are sounding like me, or am I sounding like them? It's the first time actually, Napoleon Hill is not the first time I'm meeting him. I read Napoleon Hill's book a couple 2 years ago, maybe. I forgot mostly what it's written, but I read Think and Grow Rich, very useful book, and now I'm reading this one. But it's the first time I'm meeting Sharon. Alright, let's continue. This is Napoleon Hill speaking. This other self will aid you in translating your plans into reality. Moreover, you should know that it begins always with your major or most pronounced desire. At this time, your major desire, the one which brought you here, is to publish and distribute the result of your research into the causes of successes and failure. You estimate that you will need approximately $25,000 US. Among your acquaintances, there is a man who will supply you with this needed capital. Begin at once to call into your mind the names of all persons of your acquaintance whom you have reason to believe might be induced to furnish the financial aid you require. When the name of the logical person comes into your mind, you will recognize it immediately. Communicate with that person, and the aid you seek will be given. In your approach, however, present your request in terminology, such as you would use in the usual course of business transactions. Make no reference whatsoever to this introduction you have had to your other self. If you violate these instructions, you will meet with temporary defeat. Your other self will remain in charge and continue to direct you as long as you rely upon it. Keep doubt and fear and worry and all those thoughts of limitation entirely out of your mind. That will be all for the present. You will now begin to move of your own free will. She mentions free will. Free will precisely as you did before you discovered your other self. Physically, you are the same as you have always been. Therefore, no one will recognize that any change has taken place in you. I looked around the room, blinked my eyes to make sure that I was not dreaming. I got up and walked over to a mirror and looked at myself closely. The expression of myself had changed from one of doubt to one of encouraged and faith. There was no longer doubt in my mind and that my physical body was in charge of an influence far different from the one which had been dethroned 2 nights before, as I walked around that schoolhouse in West Virginia. Sharon's comment. And we're going to end this chapter here. If you want chapter 2, I will organize a Zoom meeting for everyone if you want the replay, or if you want to join me and discuss about this book. It would be amazing. Alright, and I will link the book in the description below. Alright, here in editing the manuscript, I have ended the chapter at one of the great turning points in the author's life. This is Sharon, okay? Here in editing the manuscript, I have ended the chapter at one of the great turning points in the author's life. Have you ever undergone a life change such as one of Hill describes above? It can also be described in religious terms as conversion experience. Other may refer it to as a wake up call, or a tap on the shoulder, or more vehemently as a slap in the face. Alright. Next chapter is a new world is revealed to me. This is when you start seeing differently with your eyes. Alright. That was cool. I could definitely relate to his, awakening, to how he got the message from this other self. Such a powerful book. So, how I started reading this book. So, of course, just like how God leads me to certain things or knowledge, it came from something that caught my attention. So, one day I was watching my emails, and I normally ignore marketing emails, especially from those coaches that I follow. So I follow Tony Robbins, Mel Robbins, Jay Shetty, a lot of this, self-improvement, like motivational speakers that I follow, and they send me emails. But one day I was scrolling in my emails and I saw Dean Graziosi's email. It caught my attention. I clicked on it and it led me to a YouTube video. And that YouTube video was speaking about this book. And Dean Graziosi was talking about like how the devil is working in our lives and how we should avoid these things happening in our lives. And since then, I had this book in my mind. And this year, while I'm here in Amsterdam, I've been working in libraries. And I looked in libraries. There are just 2 books here in Amsterdam, in the whole city in Amsterdam, that I could read. I could order it. But I'm in that humbling situation with God. And I can read it for free in the libraries. In the library where I stay normally, in Central Station, it should be there, but someone got it and never gave it back. Alright, so that person is going to be penalized. And the other book, the second book, is here in the other library that I go to, and it's actually nearer to my house. And this is the only book that I have access to it right now. As I said, I could order it if something happens, but yeah, that is how I started reading this book, because it catched my attention and it feels like there is something in there that I need to know, and I go deep into it. Yeah, it's like a curiosity thing. Yeah, it's a feeling. It's a gut feeling. You could say it like that. And I read it. It gives me messages of confirmations. It makes me feel that I am together with something. Like just the first chapter, it feels like I am observed. It feels like someone else knows what I'm doing, and it's exactly telling me from this book. Sounds scary? No, it sounds like, really someone out there knows the plan and that I am going into the right tracks. That is how it feels like. It gives encouragement and also peace at the same time. So yeah, that is the end of our chapter 1, beginning of the book Outwitting the Devil, The Secrets to Freedom and Success. Comment below, how do you want me to continue with this? I'm not sure if I should. I think I shouldn't be doing this with a book, because people still need to earn money from this. It's like $16. I'm not sure. I will research about it. I will ask the Holy Spirit what should I do with it. Yeah. See you in the next one.